We are now going to look at using the gradient tool in Inkscape. I have just drawn a simple rectangle that I'm going to add a gradient to. Before you select the gradient tool, always remember to select the shape you want to add the gradient to. I am now going to click on the gradient tool, which is located in the left toolbar. When you initially select the gradient tool, it will give you several options at the top of the screen. The first two options are for what type of gradient you want. The first option is for linear, the second one is for a radial gradient. The other two options ask what you want the gradient to be displayed on. The first one is for the face of the object, and the second one is for the stroke, which is just the border around the object. For this first example, I'm going to select a linear gradient on the face of the object. To add the new gradient, you start by clicking where you want the gradient to begin and drag it to where you want the gradient to end. By default, it has chosen a gray gradient because that was the color of my initial shape. I can now adjust this color by clicking Edit. Right now I have two stops, which are the colors in the gradient. You can add more stops and therefore add more colors to your gradient. Whichever stop you have selected, it'll add a gradient above that one in the sequence. So since I have my bottom one selected, it will add a gradient above it on the line sequence. So when I click Add Stop, it gives me a new point on the line, which is this one here. I can now adjust this color. It is a lot easier to choose colors for the gradient tool using the wheel tool in the color menu. I have now added several colors to this gradient. Now I can adjust how the colors appear on the gradient. Each stop has an opacity number, which is how transparent the object is. The first one is at 250, which is 100% opacity, and the last one is closer to 0, which means it is pretty much completely see-through. Now that I'm done with this, I can still adjust where each color begins. By selecting the individual nodes, I can determine where a color stops and where it ends. And I can also change where the gradient begins and ends by dragging the first two around the screen. One thing to keep in mind is wherever you have your shape, that's where the gradient will be. When you try to move it around, you will lose the gradient. So remember to always have your shape where you want it to be before you add a gradient to it. Next, we're going to look at the radial gradient. The only major difference between it and the linear gradient is where the gradient begins. In the linear gradient, you can select where you want to start and where you want to finish. In this case, your first point is where the center of the circle begins. So, since I want the full circle, I'm going to select in the center of my rectangle and drag it out. I can use this handle here to rotate my shape and also pull it together. Now I can do the exact same things as I did with the original gradient and select its shape, color, and opacity.